I'm not sure exactly why. Mistam it's Hapi Kabbalah. After Yom Tif, we're still in Yom Tif mode. So classes officially start Wednesday. So I'm going to have a fabrengen with you. I'm going to have a conversation with you. And the topic is V'Yaakov holach l'darkei. That's my topic. V'Yaakov holach l'darkei. V'Yaakov holach l'darkei is a pasuk in Chumash that Yaakov went on his way. Right? Yaakov Avinu was 20 years by Lavan, and Lavan schemed him and drayed him and connived. And Yaakov Avinu, with his tmimus, outdid Lavan. He gets away. Lavan chases him. Lavan catches up to him. And they have another showdown. They have another engagement, which is, it's not physical, but it's very tense. And then it says, Vayelech vayoshav Lavan mimkoimei. Lavan went back home. V'Yaakov holach l'darkei. Yaakov goes in his way. What are the next words? Anybody know what the next words are? Vayifke ubei malachei elikim. Yaakov goes on his ways and he meets Malachim, and he said, Machon elikim zeh vayikra shem hamokim hahu. What's the last word of Pashas? Machanoim. Why Machanoim loshen rabim? Because the Malachim of Chutz La'aretz were leaving him, and the Malachim of Eretz Yisrael were coming to him. As soon as he was away from Lavan, the Malachim were able to come out of hiding. That's how the pasuk goes. V'Yaakov holach l'darkei. Yaakov goes on his way, the way of Yaakov Avinu, which is the way of Torah and mitzvahs, and the first thing that happens, he meets Malachim, and the next pasuk is the beginning of Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim. He sent these Malachim away to go meet Esav, his next combatant, his next birur, his next avodah. So as you know, there was a tradition in Lubavitch that on Shabbos Bereishis they used to bang on the bim and they would say V'Yaakov holach l'darkei. The Rebbe made a whole Yiddishkeit out of Yaakov holach l'darkei. Mamish, a whole Yiddishkeit out of Yaakov holach l'darkei. So, but let me set you up, okay? I have time. I have till 12:30. I have 43 minutes to be exact. The setup for this is that Tishrei is a story. It's a story that starts with the king in the field. The king comes to us in the field. That's Elul. It continues with the peasants in the palace. Aseres Yemei Tshuva, Hashem invites us into His palace, and we're so close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Aseres Yemei Tshuva, the Gemara says, Nigla the Torah says, Dirshu Hashem be'imatzei kira'u b'yesei karev. You search for Hashem when He can be found. You call Him when He is near. Says the Gemara, Eilu asara yomim shebeinei Shashana l'yom HaKippurim. The Aseres Yemei Tshuva, Hashem is close to us. We're in the palace. Now here's the part of the story which is interesting. After being in the palace for 10 days, the king kicks us out of the palace. We're never closer to the king than Ne'ilah. 15 minutes later, the king says, take your things and go. So imagine you're that peasant. A farmer, a simple person, has a very simple life. It's a beautiful life. It's a simple, not very sophisticated, not very deep, not very lofty, not very scholarly. And you provide food, right? You feed the kingdom. Nobody asks the king to come visit the field. He volunteers. He comes into the field and he makes friends with us. The Shomers Begufim, these are the farmers. We didn't ask him. He came by himself. We're delighted. We're happy to have him. We're particularly happy to have him because he's being very nice about it. He's not forcing us to behave. He's not making us act like tzaddikim. We can continue being farmers, and the king is in the field with us. And then the king tells us, I'm going back to my palace. Come. So the farmers say, what an opportunity. We're going from being farmers to being royal. They come into the palace, and it takes them a while to acclimate themselves. And you put farmers in a palace, they break things by looking at them, you know. They don't know how to walk, they don't know how to talk, they don't know how to eat, they don't know how to dress, they don't know how to sleep. They're so unconditioned for life in a palace, but they get used to it. You can get used to a lot of things. By the time the visit in the palace is over, they're finally comfortable in the palace. They have this incredibly intimate moment with the king, which we're going to call Ne'ilah, and then the king says, go. So what do the people say? You know the story, Isha Ashwinamis and Elisha, right? I never asked you for any children. Why did you give me a baby? And now the baby died. Have to suffer double heartache. Remember that story, yeah? The peasants say to the Eibishter, we never asked you to come to the field, you came by yourself. We certainly never asked you to invite us into the palace, you invited us by yourself. You're kicking us out? You're kicking us out? What is the king's answer? The king's answer is, the only reason I came to you, and the only reason I brought you to me, because I need you to understand that you think of yourself as lowly farmers. You should know, Yisro mefanesem laviyim shabashamayim. You are feeding the whole world, the whole creation. I came to you, and I brought you to me, not to keep you in the palace, but you should go back and be farmers and live like farmers live. It's a simple life, and know that there's a king. And what you do matters to him. In fact, what you do matters to him more than the people who live in the palace, who do very sophisticated kind of work, because a society, a civilization can survive without diamonds, but they can't survive without bread. So the king says, yeah, I came by myself to you, and I unilaterally brought you into my palace, and now I'm telling you to leave. Because the kiruv that I showed you is not because I want to make you into tzaddikim, it's because I want you to be bathed in him. I want you to know about your role. So there's something which is not well known, and I want to share it with you. It's in Lekutasichas Chelik Chof, and it's based on the Rebbe Marash Shmaim V'Kocha, where all of these ideas appear. That the beginning of a Yankev Holach L'Darke is Matzah Yom Kippur. But Yankev Holach L'Darke doesn't start Shabbos Bereishis. Right after Yom Kippur begins the Yankev Holach L'Darke. Why? Think of Tishrei as a pyramid, as a mountain. Till Yom Kippur we're climbing. Ne'ilah is the peak, it's the Shi, it's the highest point on the mountain. Everything that comes after, the 4 days in Yom Kippur and Sukkot, and the 3 Simchas of Sukkot, Pesach, the Simcha of Yom Tov, the Simcha of Lulav, the Simcha of Beis Hashem, and then the 4th Simcha, the Simcha of Simchas Teirah, is coming down the mountain. The chapis, the challenge is that when the king tells you to leave the palace, you don't go away from the palace. You take the palace along with you. Just yesterday I saw such a sweet word. It was one of the WhatsApps. The reason, I remember who said it even also. A cousin of ours. Benjamin Klein is my uncle through marriage. So, the Rebbetzin worried about the Rebbe. The Rebbetzin worried about the Rebbe's health terribly. Tishrei was physically a great strain on the Rebbe's health. And the Rebbe went out and verbringed and talked and gave and studied, and the Rebbetzin sat in the house and worried. So once Tishrei was over, Benjamin Klein, one of the Rebbe's secretaries, unfortunately he's in the world of truth, said to the Rebbetzin, Tishrei is a Rebbe gegangen b'shalom. We got through it peaceful. The Rebbe's okay. We went through the whole Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Simchas Teirah, and the Rebbe's okay. Tishrei, and the Rebbetzin became very serious. The Rebbetzin, and she said to Benjamin, mir sagen nicht a Rebbe gegangen, mir sagen zugekommen. We don't say it passed, we say it was added. Right? You know this from Sfiras HaOmer. You don't say Hayom Yom Shlishi. You say Hayom Shleisha Yomim. You don't say Hayom Yom Revi'i. You say Haba Yomim. What's the difference between Yom Shlishi and Shleisha Yomim La'omer? Yom Shlishi is the 3rd day. Shleisha Yomim means 3 days. Every day of Sfira, you have more days. Not more days have passed, more days have been collected. This is the challenge when V'yankev Holach L'Darke begins. And it begins right after Yom Kippur. Are you going away from Yom Kippur, or are you bringing Yom Kippur with you? You understand? If you're going away from Yom Kippur, then V'yankev Holach L'Darke is not L'derech Hashem, it's L'darech like Lovan has a derech, Yankev has a derech. But if the V'yankev Holach L'Darke is that when you leave the palace, you bring the palace with you, that's the ultimate idea of a Yankev Holach L'Darke. You're taking the Eibishter, you're taking the Yom Neroyim, you're taking Achei Temimim, you're taking all the themes of Tishrei. Kabbalah Samalchus, Tshuva, Simcha, Achdus, you're taking them with you into your life. So the way the story goes, right, the way the mashal goes, the way the story goes, is the king tells the peasants to leave the palace. This doesn't say in a Maimer Chassidus. This says on Inside Chassidus.org. This is an embellishment of the mashal. but I have sources for it, at least to a great extent. The peasants don't go home. The king tells the peasants to leave the palace. And if the peasants would go straight home right after Yom Kippur, it would have been a waste. Everything the king gave them would have been forgotten. They go home, it's gone. The peasants leave the palace, and before they go home, they make a celebration. This is Sukkot. And it says in all the Maimorim, you know this from the Sichos, from the Maimorim, even from the Hayom Yom, that all of the inyanim that you have in the Yomim Neiroyim, the Yechida, the Kiruv HaMoed Alanitzutz, the Yegil Midas HaRachamim, which you have in the Aseres Yemei Tshuva, in Kav HaYira, you have in Sukkot and Kav HaSimcha. The joy of Sukkot is the same energy as the Oyem, the Noira, the Pachad, and the Yira of Aseres Yemei Tshuva, but it's in the language of peasants. Peasants are not good at being serious. They're not good at being rigid, but they're good at celebrating. And when the peasant meets the king, and the king embraces him, and when he's in the palace, he has to behave as he's supposed to behave in the palace. It's very hard for him. It's not natural for him. But when he leaves the palace, and he sings and dances, he translates the kiruv that the king gave him into a language which is common to him. And that's the Simcha of Sukkot, you understand? So it says in the Kocha from the Rebbe Marash, and the Rebbe repeats it in the Sichos of Taf Shema Ches, it's in the Likutei Sichos Chelek Chov, that right after Yom Kippur, the Yankav HaLachdarki begins. But we don't go home. We stick around. We sing and dance and we celebrate. But there's two celebrations. There's the celebration of Sukkot, then there's the interruption. Shmini Atzeres is called a pause, an interruption. And then there is the Simcha of Simchas Torah. And you stop. After the Simcha of Sukkot, you stop, Shmini Atzeres. And then you start being with Simcha again, the Simcha of Simchas Torah. And they're very different joys. Listen carefully. What is the joy of Sukkot and what is the joy of Simchas Torah? The joy of Sukkot is, thank God, God loves us. We're happy, we celebrate the fact that the Eibishter loves us. That's the joy of Sukkot. Then Shmini Atzeres is an interruption, Shmini Atzeres is an absorption. Then you get to the Simcha of Simchas Torah. What's the joy of Simchas Torah? Girls, this is very important to appreciate. We celebrate the fact that we could do something for the king. There's a very big difference between being happy that the Rebbe likes you and being happy that you could serve the Rebbe. The first joy is a much simpler joy. It's a much more selfish joy. The second joy is much more difficult. It's much deeper. To be happy about being a servant, which means I am now going to work on behalf of the Eibishter, and whatever he tells me to do, I'm going to do. And it's not only that I do what the king tells me, I rejoice, I celebrate, I get joy from the fact that he gave me a Torah. I celebrate the fact that he gave me a job. Nobody wants to work, right? We all want to sit on a couch and eat potato chips. The idea that a person should be so sensitized that the greatest simcha he could have is to do something on behalf of the king, this is the simcha of Simchas Torah. Verstehst? It's a very wonderful transitional moment. Not only are we close to the king, not only are we appreciating the proximity, not only are we celebrating the proximity, we're celebrating the mission. You know, you go on shlichus, mit amar shalitochen. The Rebbe sends you off on a mission. The missions are never easy. What are you happy about? You're happy about the fact that you could serve. This is Simchas Torah. And then Shabbos Bereishis comes and they bang on the bim and they say, V'yankev halach l'darkei. Yankev went on his way. V'yankev halach l'darkei is that we have a job to do. Hashem gave us a mission, which is to be Jewish in the everyday. Right? Yiddishkeit is not about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Yiddishkeit is about Cheshvan, and it's about Tevis, and it's about Iyur. It's about all the boring months. Yiddishkeit is about having a job and going to work and coming home and living like a Yid. Because that's not glorious, it's not exciting, it's not fun. But this is what we call in our culture, Lasas le'yizborech dira b'tachtoinim. This is how we make bread. This is how we make the food that the farmers are supposed to make that feeds the whole Seder Ishtashlus, including the Eibishter himself. So the Yankev Holoch Hadarkei is a process. There's the celebration of Yankev Holoch Hadarkei, and then there's the action of Yankev. When Tishrei finishes, and we leave the palace, the Yankev Holoch Hadarkei, Yankev Avinu goes off on his way. What's happening when we leave the palace, and we go off in the derech of the Eibishter, Malkei Shalom, is now we're going back to our regular lives, but we're not going away from the Eibishter, we're taking the Eibishter with us. That's the concept of a Yankev Holoch Hadarkei. When I was a kid, I went to camp. When I went to camp, I don't know how it was when you went to camp, but you're considerably younger than I. About a third of the camp, or more, were public school children. In those days, in Gan Yisrael, that complete bunks of kids who came from the release time program. Poshet, public, not from. And we sat in the same dining room, we davened in the same shul, we played ball with one another. And Gan Yisrael was very much centered around those children. And as a kid, I could never understand how come I never won a picture of the Rebbe for davening nicely, and every single kid in Punktas got a picture. Because Gan Yisrael was about the kids from public school. We were there also, you understand. It took a while for us to figure that out. But at the end of camp, there'd be a banquet. And at the banquet, one of the counselors would get up and tell the classic story about Goodbye God. It's very poignant. Every summer as a camper, I didn't have it too many times, I didn't go to camp too many times, but this, you know the story, Goodbye God? A kid comes to camp from a public school. 1 hour a week he goes to release time. What does he learn exactly? And in 2 months in Gan Yisrael, he's going to get Yiddishkeit Poshet for sometimes for a lifetime. Gan Yisrael has made kids frum, you know that? Going to camp for 2 months, in many cases, all the kids Poshet becoming frum. Shemiteiru mitzvah. So the kids come to camp and they have a good counselor. And the first night of camp, he talks to them about the Yamakeh, about tzitzis, and about Negelwasser. He gives them a lot of fun. The best counselors were the counselors for the kids from public school. And the kids start wearing yarmulkes and tzitzis, and it's a big deal when a kid is not frum and he hits a baseball and his yarmulke falls down, and instead of running to first base, he bends down and picks it up. That's Mesidus Nefesh. You know, this is what Gan Yisrael does. Anyway, the kids come to camp and they play and they learn and they daven and they have a great time, yeah? And finally camp is over and but I remember this. They're wearing the yarmulke and the tzitzis, they're carrying the negelwasser, you know, shislach, the kvartz, because at home they do Torah with each other. So the story goes that a kid walks out of his bunk and he puts his hand on the mezuzah and he says, "Goodbye, God." That's the story. And of course the point is, it's not goodbye, God. You take God with you. Now we're not kids from public school, but Tishrei is a time that we're intensely involved with God. And the meaning of the words, V'yakev holach ledarkei, is that we're not saying goodbye. You don't go away from Tishrei and go away from the Rebbe. You don't go away from Tishrei and go away from Yisodidus. You take it with you. You take it with you. That's the concept of a Yankev holach ledarkei. So the way it plays out in Lubavitch is as follows. You have 3 stages of the Yankev holach ledarkei. The first stage is Matzah Yom Kippur, like it says in the Maimonim. As soon as Yom Kippur finishes, you leave the palace, you go out into the world. The second stage is Matzah Simchas Torah, Shabbos Bereishis. But the Rebbe always comes up with new ideas. And one of the new ideas that the Rebbe came up with, and the Rebbe Poshet invented a Yom Tif where no Yom Tif existed, is the Yom Tif that's called Zayin Cheshvan. You know about Zayin Cheshvan? You know about Zayin Cheshvan? Yeah, good, yeah. What's Zayin Cheshvan? That it says in the Gemara that in Eretz Yisrael, I'm sorry? Came home. That in Eretz Yisrael they need rain right after Tishrei. Masha v'rocha bered Geshem should be said the first day of Sukkot. The reason we don't say the first day of Sukkot is because it's a siman klala b'chag, it's a sign of klala. By the way, if you were in New York this Sukkot, except for once, we had no rain a whole Sukkot. As soon as the first meeting in Crown Heights said Masha v'rocha bered Geshem, which was probably very early, it started raining. And then we said, go away, come back tomorrow. And it went away and came back tomorrow. We had an amazing sukkah. From a perspective of rain, it was almost perfect. It rained once. It's very unusual. It's a very early year. We were still in September then. October just began. So you push off Mashiach V'Roch Till Shmini Atzeres. Because to speak about rain on Sukkot is a joke, it's a contradiction. When you start saying Saint Alamata, we're not going to say Saint Alamata for 2 more months. We're at the very beginning of October. The whole October, the whole November, we're saying the same bracha. And the 4th or the 5th of December, which is going to be, I imagine, sometime in the middle of Chanukah or after Chanukah, we're going to say Saint Alamata Lebracha. But at Yisrael, they're going to start saying Saint Alamata Lebracha Zayin Cheshvan in less than 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from Simchas Torah. And the reason is, Eretz Yisrael is a country that needs rain much. Okay. Eretz Yisrael is a country that needs rain much earlier because of its relationship to the equator. Eretz Yisrael is called Eretz Haram HaGvois. Eretz Yisrael does not really have rivers and lakes. Eretz Yisrael does not have water like Egypt has water. You depend on the rain. If you depend on the rain, you have to get the rain sooner. So right after Sukkot, you should say V'sein Talamata. It's delayed by 2 weeks. Let the last Jew come home. So the Rebbe made a whole thing about it. I spoke last year. I gave several classes on it. That Achei Temimim Yisrael doesn't mean the Jew farthest away. Achei Temimim Yisrael means the Jew is on the lowest level. And until the Jew on the lowest level gets home, nobody asks for rain. So the Rebbe made a new chiddush that Tishrei doesn't end till Zayin Cheshvan. Now understand, in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, people walked. Or they went super fast, they went by horse and wagon. Today we go on a jet, you're home in 6 hours, living in Israel, you're home in 8 hours. But because in the times of the Beis Hamikdash, it took 2 weeks to get home, till Zayin Cheshvan, still Tishrei. And the Rebbe used to say that those people who have time should stay by the Rebbe till Zayin Cheshvan. And Tishrei did not end till 2 weeks after Simchas Torah, literally. Now who could afford to stay 2 more weeks after Yom Tov? Most people have jobs, they have work, they have lives, they have families. 2 groups of people, the Bachrim and the unemployed. So the Bachrim stuck around for 2 more weeks, and what did they do? Nobody knows. And the unemployed was Vishav Elamavsky Al-Vashalom, who was a big tzaddik, a very big chassid. He stayed till Zayin Cheshvan. His whole life revolved around the Rebbe's schedule, so Zayin Cheshvan was his date. Until Zayin Cheshvan was Tishrei here. The Rebbe used to build a platform for the Rebbe Tishrei. The first time they built the platform was in 1973, Tafshan Lamed Dalet. The Rebbe did not want the platform. The Rebbe did not want the platform. The Rebbe wanted to daven as the same level of those older people. When they built the platform, the Rebbe made several rules. One of the rules was that somebody else has to be on the platform with him. And the other rule is that the minute Simchas Torah is over, the platform comes down. And with the Rebbe, he didn't play games. The Rebbe wasn't like me and you. You say, oh, I forgot, I'll do it tomorrow. There was no tomorrow. Simchas Torah, by the Fabrengen, that platform was taken away. Then, when the Rebbe started speaking about Zayin Cheshvan, the platform stayed 2 more weeks. Till Zayin Cheshvan. Motzah Zayin Cheshvan, the platform disappeared. Much, much later, when the Rebbetzin Chayamushka passed away, and the Rebbe began to daven Shachas Mincha Maida with the minyan, the platform stayed permanently. But that's the story of the platform. The Rebbe made a Tishrei is not whatever it is, 3 weeks and 2 days, it's 5 weeks. If you want to count from Rosh Hashanah till Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah is 23 days. Count till Zayin Cheshvan, you got to add 14 more. So it's 37 days. The Rebbe stretched Tishrei by 2, literally add a whole third, more than a third to Tishrei. And if you were around Crown Heights, if you were around the Rebbe, the mood of Simchas Torah remained till Zayin Cheshvan. The Rebbe used to Fabrein Shabbos Neach, Fabrein Shabbos Lach Lecha. I mean, it's a practical thing, and maybe it doesn't sound so holy, but the fact was, Tishrei was a very packed Yom Tov. Cheshvan was nothing. The Rebbe didn't Fabrein in Cheshvan. After Tishrei, the next Fabrein was Shabbos Mevorchim Kislev. In the later years, Chof Cheshvan the Rebbe Fabreinged. But once the Rebbe made a big deal about Zayin Cheshvan, Bereishis, Noach, and Lech Lecha was still Tishrei, so he Fabreinged every Shabbos. And then he took his break. There was a few weeks that was sort of quiet. I don't know if the Rebbe did it for himself, as a Pasha Ken Upruin, or he did it for us, that we should be able to rest. But it used to be that after Simchas Torah and Shabbos Bereishis, there was a break, a whole month. And in Kislev, of course, everything was again revved up. But once the Rebbe started speaking about Zayin Cheshvan, till Zayin Cheshvan was Tishrei. Somebody said something, I heard a voice.
No, I asked her about Cheshvan.
What about?
Cheshvan.
So the Chof Cheshvan started in the Mems. The Rebbe didn't Fabreing in the Lamed Chof Cheshvan. The Rebbe didn't, it's later. But even then, until the last few years that the Rebbe verbringt every Shabbos, Lech Lecha, Vayera, Chayesara, very often, Noach, there were no verbringens. But once the Rebbe made Zayin Cheshvan into a thing, so till Zayin Cheshvan was still Tishrei.
All the sikhs that you have for these Shabbos are all either later or were not on Shabbos?
You could never say about the Rebbe all and ever, but to a great extent it's true. Yeah. So this is the type of Yankov Al-Chadarke. And the whole chap of the Rebbe, the whole priority of the Rebbe was that when we leave here, we should take it with us. We should take Tishrei with us. I don't know if you're familiar with, there's a letter, Machon, they give it out every year. I don't know if they give it out here. But the Zalman Jaffe was a Yid from Manchester, was very close to the Rebbe. The Rebbe called him Mr. Manchester. Zalman Jaffe was a businessman. Until the end of his life came out, he was clean shaven. At the very end of his life, he grew a beard. Zalman Jaffe's children are shluchim. He became very connected to the Rebbe. He loved 770. He didn't mind the pushing and the elbowing. He pushed back and he elbowed back, as he describes it in his My Encounter. You've read his books, they're very sweet. Zalman Jaffe wrote the books My Encounter with the Rebbe. They're really worthwhile reading because they're very intimate. You're in 770. And the Rebbe had a very special relationship with Zalman Jaffe. But one of the things about Zalman Jaffe was he was very straight with the Rebbe. He never did what we did, put the Rebbe on a pedestal. He had great respect for the Rebbe, but he always talked to the Rebbe like a person. And I think that's part of the reason the Rebbe liked him so much. So one of his stories is that in 19 Tafshin Mem Aleph, which was one of the most exciting Tishreis ever, it was very cold. It was cold. And it was packed. There were so many guests. Everybody went home sick. Everyone went home sick. He went for the Rebbe sick. So he wrote to the Rebbe a letter saying Tisha was gewaldig, it was wonderful with the Rebbe, It's a pity it was cold, but everybody went home sick. So he wrote to the Rebbe. And the Rebbe wrote him back a letter, which is now very famous. It's one of the most famous letters of the Rebbe. You've come across it at some point in high school or in seminary. Where the Rebbe writes to him, thank you for coming. A standard letter, thank you for coming, it was nice to see you, and so on and so forth. And then there's a long P.S. And the Rebbe writes, I was very surprised to read that you wrote in your letter that over here it was cold and everybody went home cold. The whole point of coming here is to warm up. And people are supposed to go away warm and not cold. And the Rebbe says, I know that's not what you meant. I know that's not what you meant. You didn't mean spiritually cold, you meant physically cold. But everything is b'hashgacha pratis. And the fact that you wrote to me that people are going away from the Rebbe, that Tishrei was cold and they're going away cold, means that Beruch Niyas Ha'anyanim, what Tishrei is supposed to achieve, did not achieve as much as it needs to. That when you come to the Rebbe, you come to warm up, and you go away from the Rebbe, you go away warm, not cold. Or to say it practically, if you go on the most exciting trip in the world, you go, I don't know what you like to do, skiing, Six Flags, I don't know what your pleasure is. You travel through Europe, and you come home with a cold, you're not going to remember the cold. You got sick. It's not what happened. You had a very meaningful trip. Okay, there was a price to pay. If you come back from the Rebbe, and what's your observation? I'm sick. That's what you took from the Rebbe. That's what the Rebbe is writing to him. This is a very, very famous letter. You've seen it, I would imagine, yeah? You know about this letter? If you'll remind me, I'll try to find it for you, and if there's a group, Seminary Base has a group, yeah? If one of you will send me your request, I'll send you the letter. I have to find it, but I should be able to find it. It's a good letter to read. You come away from the Rebbe warm. You're saying something? Let me give you another expression of the same. Also, all in the Rebbe's language, and the Rebbe's Torah, and the Rebbe's Fabringen. And that is the following. Now, everybody knows the story of Shmini Atzeres. Everybody knows the story of Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres really is the fourth Chag. The Pasuk says Sholosh Regolim, but really we have Arba Regolim. You have Pesach, and Pesach has a Atzeres, which is Shavuos. It's two different Moedim, two different Regolim. Then you have Sukkos, and Sukkos also has an Atzeres, which is the fourth Regel, which is Shmini Atzeres. The difference is that between Pesach and the Atzeres of Pesach, you have 50 days. You go home and you come back. Between Sukkot and Shmini Atzeres, there's no days. It's called Shmini. It's the 8th day, which is Atzeres. This is why in some places it's called the 3rd regel, some places called the 4th regel. I mean, in Siddur, it's the 4th regel, right? In the Siddur, you have 4 columns. Yom Chag HaPesach, Yom Chag HaShavuos, Yom Chag HaSukkot, and Shmini Chag HaZeh. The 4 Moedim. The difference is that Shmini Atzeres, because you're going to the winter, there's no time to travel, so you make it right away, right? The famous mashal about the king who has daughters, those who live close, when they come to visit, he says, go home and come back again. Those who live far, they come, he says, listen, it's going to be hard for you to come back again. Let's spend another day together. Brave in the galgal, I need Shmini Atzeres, you don't have 13 cows or 12 cows or 14 goats, 14 sheep, you have one. Because it's the Yidden and the Eibush that are spending one more day together. So the Lashon and the Medrash, which the Rebbe would frequently talk about, is Kasha alai pridaschem. You remember this? Kasha alai pridaschem. It's hard for me that we're separating. So the Rebbe Pashat analyzes the words. It's so exact in the Lashon HaMedrash. The Medrash says Kasha alai pridaschem. The Rebbe of Hebrew, what is the meaning? It's hard for me pridaschem. Translate. Your separation. What should it say? Kasha alai pridaseinu, our separation. You're gonna rub your hands on the table. You touch your shoes. You have to wash your hands. Kasha alai pridaseinu, our separating. You come to visit the Melech, you leave the Melech. So the king says, how do we separate? So what does the Rebbe explain? You never leave the Rebbe. Everybody comes to the king. Everybody comes to the Rebbe. Everybody comes to the Beis Chayim, to 770 Yom Tov. When you leave, you take the Rebbe with you. The Kasha alai is not pridaseinu. When you go away from here, you take the Rebbe with you. But what you're not taking away with you, all the other people you met by the Rebbe. And that's the Kasha alai pridaschem. That when you're going away from the Rebbe after Tishrei, from the Rebbe you're not separated. From the Eibush you're not separated. Chas v'shalom. You're taking the Eibush with you. Taking the Rebbe with you. But we become separated from one another. And that's the Lashon HaMedrash, Kasha alai pridaschem. All of these ideas that I just shared are consistent with the statement, V'yankav ha'olchadarki. V'yankav ha'olchadarki means you have to take it with us, right? Or to give it to you, I'll give it to you in a different form, you'll understand right away. In our lives, there are many metaphors, there are many mishalim for the king in the field and the peasants in the palace and the V'yankav ha'olchadarki. One of the best metaphors is being a single girl in school and being a married woman, wife, and then mother, in the world. Right now, you're incredibly holy. Your entire life is Chassidus, Teira, Avodah, Gemilas Chasadim. What do? You sit in school and you learn. After school, you go, you do a job. I'm imagining that for most of you, this is involved in Kodesh. Your entire world is Yiddishkeit. And then you're going to get married. So marriage is a beautiful thing, right? We're all blinded by marriage because it's so exciting. It stops being exciting a pretty short time after. And then nebuch, you're stuck, you're married, yeah? Then you have to build a life with a man of all things, if you can imagine that, yeah? And Hashem helps, you figure it out. There's nothing you have done as a single girl which will be as difficult as anything you're going to do as a married woman. It's just the way it is. It's an incredible... I was a bacher, and then I got married. Being a bacher was unbelievable, very exciting. But it was very free. Could I say that if I had known when I was a bacher what I know now, I would have used my bacher minutes 10 times more exactly and precisely, because I would appreciate the gift. When you're a bacher, you feel like you're going to be a bacher forever. But you're not. So there's a transition, you know. Being single and being a Chassidish boy or a Chassidish girl in yeshiva, this is Melech Basadeh, this is the peasants in the palace. It's even the celebration when the king kicks you out. But it's not life. The Yankev, Ha'olchadarke is when Hashem helps and you find a zivig and you make a shidduch and you get married and you have shalom bayis and you have health and then you have children and you have panosa and you have a shlichus and they be blessed with all the brachas. That's the Yankev, Ha'olchadarke. And that's not so pushed. It's quite challenging, you know. Going away from Tishrei, Yankev Ha'olchadarke is a cliche. But getting married and having a life and being a yid in that life, Yaakov Ha'Chadak is not a cliche at all. It's an incredible challenge. It's an opportunity. It's a bracha. It's a great challenge. That's the oimek. That's the pnimius of Ha'Chadak. That you don't go away from the king. You take the king with you into whatever life is going to bring. And in a microcosm, in a smaller way, this is Yom Tiv. And in an even smaller way, this is every single Shabbos. Every Shabbos is a mini Melech Basada and peasants in the palace, and Shabbos we separate from the world. We put ourselves into a state of holiness, and then we leave it. And Matzah Yom Tov, Matzah Shabbos, I mean, we don't say it, but we sing it. You sing a song, Al Tira Avdei Yankiv, right? Why do you sing Al Tira Avdei Yankiv? Does anybody know why Matzah Shabbos you sing Al Tira Avdei Yankiv? Are you aware of that we sing a song, Al Tira Avdei Yankiv? The answer is because you have every reason to be afraid. Al Tira Avdei Yankiv means, don't be afraid, my servant Jacob, Yankov, which is the lower name, not Yisrael, but Yankov. Because you're going away from Shabbos. Shabbos you went away from the world. Shabbos you went into the palace. And then Motzah Shabbos comes and you're going back to the world. So you sing Al Tira Avdei Yankov, you're going into the world, don't be afraid. Why? Because you take Shabbos with you. And in an even narrower way, it's every single day. When you get up in the morning, and again, one day you're going to be in the so-called real world. And you learn a little bit, and you daven a little bit, or you wish you could learn a little bit, and you wish you could daven a little bit, or you daven a little bit, and you learn a little bit, and then starts your day. The few minutes that you have in the morning to connect HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this is your Tishrei of the day. And then going out to do everything you need to do to support, as a mother, and as a wife, or as a husband, and as a father, this is a Yankov Ha'Chadarke. I know a woman, she should live and be well. I was in her house. She's a very interesting lady. And she had on the wall in her house a sign that said Mizrach. It's a small little picture from, what's that artist who makes, from Machon Mochnik, like Gesund. You know how he makes everything with very colors and little pictures within the letters, Mizrach. So I asked her, how many people put in the wall in their home Mizrach? Well, you have a minyan here. So she told me she had 11 kids. She said, I get up in the morning, I give the kids breakfast, I make them lunch, send them with lunch to school, and whatever she had to do, she had there was a noisy house. All the kids go off to school, I get dressed, I put on my sheitel, and I stand here, and I daven. This was her sanctuary, in her home, she made a little shul. That's her Tishrei of the day. But she didn't stand by that wall for very long because the kids were coming home, and a lot of things had to happen between when the time the children left and the children came back home. And that's the Yankov Ha'Chadak. That's the concept. That's the concept. What's the punchline? What's the punchline? What's the message? What's the lesson? What's the takeaway? The message is, girls, and we don't like to hear this, but it's really true. The Eibishter created us not for Tishrei, but for the whole year. The Eibishter created us not for Yom Tiv, but for the regular days. The Eibishter created us not for Shabbos, but for the weekdays that come after. The Eibishter created us not for the davening and the learning we do in the morning, but for the work that we do a whole day. And that we should be Jewish in that. That we should be Jewish in that. The Rebbe Rashab used to say, the Rebbe Rashab made Yeshivas Tem Chatmimim. Yeshivas Tem Chatmimim was a time warp. Anybody who learned the Tem Chatmimim, it was mamish a time warp. For those 20 years or so, it's a little bit less than 20 years, that Lubavitch was, the Tem was in Lubavitch, Bachrim were raised up to an incredibly high level. I mean, the Tem Chatmimim produced giants, many great people. Bali Mesiras Nefesh, Chassidim. Unfortunately, so many of them were killed between Stalin and Hitler. We don't even know many of their names. And the Rebbe Rashab said, when a Bacha sits at Tem Chatmimim and he davens and he learns 18, 20 hours a day, I'm not in this boat. It doesn't work for me. Until he leaves yeshiva. When he leaves yeshiva and he has a real life, then we see the all of the Tem Chatmimim had. You get married and you have a family and you're building a home together with a husband. I said a bad word a second time, Rahman al-Islan, yeah? Then you see the effect that Tem Chatmimim had on a person in the years that doing Tem Chatmimim. I had a mashpia who passed away this past year, unfortunately. His name was Harav Pinchas Korf. He was a very chmein, His bittul was one of a kind. His head of Matthias Atzma, the idea that he took up no space, there was nobody like him. The idea that a human being should literally have no ich, there was nobody like an opinion. He literally had no I whatsoever. It was completely bottle, really, in an incredible way. But he was our teacher, he was our mashpia. And one of his Chassidish averter was that the Friedrich Rebbe used to make fabrengens. The Friedrich Rebbe made fabrengens when his father, the Rebbe Rashab, was still alive. When the Friedrich Rebbe made fabrengens, they were very exclusive. They were not open to all the Bachrim. It was only the Eltere Bachrim. And the fabrengens were very powerful. When the Friedrich Rebbe fabrenged, during the lifetime of the Rebbe Rashab, he used to speak so strong, so sharp, so intensely, so much Mesiras Nefesh, it was hard to listen to. Mamish. So one of the things that the Friedrich Rebbe said at one of the fabrengens is the following. He says, 2 boys come to Achei Temimim in Lubavitch. And one of them spends years in Achei Temimim. Years. What we call high school and post-high school. And postgraduates. I led 10 years in Achei Temimim. From Bar Mitzvah till the Chasana. Then he gets married and he goes home and it's like it never happened. He becomes a balabos like everybody else. Another boy comes to Achei Temimim. He's in Achei Temimim a few months. Then he's drafted. He goes off to the army. He never comes back to yeshiva. But his whole life he's a Tomah. So the Friedrich Rebbe said, how could this be? One person spends so many years at Achei Temimim. He leaves Achei Temimim like he was never there. Another boy spends such a short time and his whole life has changed. So the Friedrich Rebbe answered, it depends on attitude. If a person's attitude is that he's coming to Achei Temimim to get an education, so he's a visitor to Achei Temimim, and when he leaves Achei Temimim, he leaves it, goes to wherever he has to do. But if you come to Lubavitch, and this is the Friedrich Rebbe's words, and the attitude is, Lubavitch bin ich geboren geworden. I was born in Lubavitch. In Lubavitch, I'm going to live. The Rebbe is my tate, Achei Temimim is my mama, the Rebbe is my father, Achei Temimim is my mother. In Lubavitch, I'm going to live my years. I'm going to get married and build my home. And in Lubavitch, I'm going to pass away. And they're going to bury me in the cemetery of Lubavitch. So the Rebbe said, if you last a few weeks, if this is the attitude, it's for a lifetime. That's V'yankav Hol-Chadarke. V'yankav Hol-Chadarke is not going away from Tisha, it's taking Tisha with you. And for you, for girls of seminary bays, it means you're going to very soon amidst Hashem. I wish you all an easy time finding a shidduch, and it should work, and it should be forever, and it should be healthy, and it should be blessed, and it should be happy, and it should be fruitful. I mean it. These are all very serious berachas that should not be taken for granted. The V'yankav Hol-Chadarke is how much of what Achei Temimim gave me, how much I got from these years when I had time to fabreng and sing Negunim and say Tillim and do and learn Rambam that some of the girls are doing. That in the real life it's going to be very hard for you to do those things. How much did you take? How much of the oil and the chayas and the koyach do you take from here? Okay, I will see you when I see you. Good morning to all of you.